So I'm going to give some information about that I learned about banquets that would have occurred during biblical times, and also information about some ingredients for one of the recipes that might be served at excuse me, a banquet in biblical times, which is dates stuffed with cream cheese and almonds as a dessert. So in terms of the banquet itself, the feast began at the entryway with a process where guests' feet would be washed, and sometimes anointed with perfumed oil. This was really a common sense type thing. People were walking around in their sandals in all sorts of dirty places, and the host did not want dirt tracked into the house. So it was, as a practical matter, the guests had their feet washed when they first came in. And if they used perfumed oil, that was to moisturize and also just for perfuming. Then, as they entered the dining room, there was actually two parts to a typical banquet. The first section focused on the eating, where they would have appetizers and then the main dish. And then there was a second part that then focused on entertainment and wine. And as part of that, there would also be the third course of the meal, a dessert, like for example, the stuffed dates that I mentioned that I was going to make. And this second part of the the banquet with the wine and the entertainment also often involved a prayer, whether that would be the Greek and the Romans praying to the god of wine, or the Jews who would pray to the one God. Blessed are you, Lord, our God, King of the universe, who creates the fruit of the vine, and that's referring to wine. The other big piece of that second wine and entertainment component was philosophical conversation, was actually a form of entertainment. The host would often choose a guest in advance who would be responsible for putting out questions for discussion. Some of the themes that they might have discussed in these times are the nature of friendship, the nature of community. For the Jews, they would actually discuss and debate the meaning of the Torah or the law of Moses. And politics and religion were also common themes for discussion. And as you can imagine, as the evening progressed and there was more and more wine, those conversations often would be expected to become more lively. Now, in terms of the actual recipe that I'm going to make, so I'm going to give some information about the dates, the cheese, and the almonds. So the dates, we know that by the 1st century, there were about as many as 30 different varieties of great dates growing in the Middle East. Dates are very high in sugar, and they're a great source of vitamin C. They could be eaten alone as an energizing snack or incorporated into recipes. They could be chopped and pressed for storage. They could even be carried out onto the field as snacks. And it's known that the pit, once it was removed, sometimes the date, rather than being chopped and pressed, would be kept whole, and that whole would be stuffed with soft cheese, almonds, or other fillings for a special dessert at a banquet. And dates and date palms were symbolic of life and faith. They grew tall near an oasis, so the palms were a sign of the presence of life-giving water in what was an otherwise arid climate. And it was hope for thirsty travelers if they saw these date palms. And many Christians to this day still use date fronds to celebrate Palm Sunday, the Sunday before Easter. Now, the nuts that are part of this recipe. Some information about nuts. Nuts provided a important source of protein during the first century, as they do today. They were served with meals, sometimes as an appetizer, as part of the dinner or part of the dessert. They were added to both sweet and savory foods. Nuts could be ground up with a mortar and pestle and actually used to thicken dips and sauces. And roasting the nuts is a way to really bring out their flavor even more. It can be done in the oven or on a pan as well. And lastly, the cheese. So, as for cheese, we know that in the first century, milk was used to make cheese, yogurt, and butter. Cheese making had actually by that time become quite sophisticated, and there was a variety of cheeses, especially in larger cities, while in more rural areas, the cheese making process would typically be more simple. Interestingly enough, food historians believe that the first cheese might have actually been created by accident, where milk was stored. People were looking for ways to store milk, and it's thought that they may have stored them in the inner linings from other animals that they had butchered for meat. And those lining materials, like an intestine lining or a bladder lining, used as a place to hold the milk, actually resulted in curdling because of the enzyme, and I'm maybe not pronouncing this right, but rennet, R-E-N-N-E-T. That's an enzyme that actually causes the curdle, which is the building block for cheese. So after cheese was accidentally discovered that way, then the Israelites took it a step further by then realizing that that same enzyme could be found in non-animal sources, plants, like fig tree sap or thistle buds would actually have that same enzyme. So the people of the first century Mediterranean had cheeses like cream cheese, cottage cheese, cheese curds, and they actually had a variety of harder cheeses as well. Like, historians believe that they were like today's cheddar or feta cheese. And even more sophisticated than that, Roman cheesemakers, even at this time, actually developed a technique of putting wheels of cheese near smoking or smoldering fires to actually create a smoky flavored cheese. So again, the cheese was quite sophisticated already by this time. So that is some information about the banquet where a dish like stuffed dates would be served, and some information about the different ingredients, the 3 ingredients I'll be using to make the almond and cream cheese stuffed dates. So stay tuned for that part. Thank you. All right, and now I'm going to make these stuffed dates. So I've taken pitted dates. I've cut them with a slit on the top and then pulled them apart, kind of making an opening. I'm going to take a little dab of cream cheese, put that in the middle, and then put a whole almond on top of that and squeeze it together. And I just used regular block of cream cheese and whole almonds. I happen to have these little snack packets that I used for that to use up. And that's going to be the stuffed dates.